His Wisdom by Ginzberg. But Solomon's wealth and pomp were as naught in comparison with his wisdom. When God appeared to him in Gibeon in a dream by night, and gave him leave to ask what he would, a grace accorded to none beside except King Ahaz of Judah, and promised only to the Messiah in time to come. 17. Solomon chose wisdom, knowing that wisdom once in his possession, all else would come of itself. 18. His wisdom, the scriptures testify, was greater than the wisdom of Ethan the Ezrahite, and Heman and Calcol and Darda, the three sons of Mahal. This means that he was wiser than Abraham. 19. Moses. 20. Joseph. 21. And the generation of the desert. 22. He excelled even Adam. 23. His proverbs which have come down to us are barely 800 in number. Nevertheless, the scripture counts them equal to 3,000, for the reason that each verse in his book admits of a double and a triple interpretation. In his wisdom, he analyzed the laws revealed to Moses, and he assigned reasons for the ritual and ceremonial ordinances of the Torah, which without his explanation had seemed strange. 24. The 49 gates of wisdom were open to Solomon as they had been to Moses, but the wise king sought to outdo even the wise legislator. He had such confidence in himself that he would have dispensed judgment without resort to witnesses had he not been prevented by a heavenly voice. 25. The first proof of his wisdom was given in his verdict, in the case of the child claimed by two mothers as their own. When the women presented their difficulty, the king said that God in his wisdom had foreseen that such a quarrel would arise, and therefore had created the organs of man in pairs, so that neither of the two parties to the dispute might be wronged. On hearing these words from the king, Solomon's counselors lamented, "Woe to thee, O land, when thy king is a youth." In a little while they realized the wisdom of the king, and then they exclaimed, "Happy art thou, O land, when thy king is a free man." The quarrel had of set purpose been brought on by God to the end that Solomon's wisdom might be made known. In reality, the two litigants were not women at all, but spirits. That all doubt about the fairness of the verdict might be dispelled, a heavenly voice proclaimed, "This is the mother of the child." 26. During the lifetime of David, when Solomon was still a lad, he had settled another difficult case in an equally brilliant way. A wealthy man had sent his son on a protracted business trip to Africa. On his return, he found that his father had died in the meantime, and his treasures had passed into the possession of a crafty slave, who had succeeded in ridding himself of all the other slaves or intimidating them. In vain the rightful heir urged his claim before King David. As he could not bring witnesses to testify for him, there was no way of dispossessing the slave, who likewise called himself the son of the deceased. The child Solomon heard the case, and he devised a method of arriving at the truth. He had the father's corpse exhumed, and he dyed one of the bones with the blood first of one of the claimants, and then of the other. The blood of the slave showed no affinity with the bone, while the blood of the true heir permeated it, so the real son secured his inheritance. 27. After his accession to the throne, a peculiar quarrel among heirs was brought before Solomon for adjudication. Asmodeus, the king of demons, once said to Solomon, "Thou art the wisest of men, yet I shall show thee something thou hast never seen." Thereupon Asmodeus stuck his finger in the ground, and up came a double-headed man. He was one of the Canaanites, who live underground, and are altogether different in nature and habit from the denizens of the upper world. Then Solomon prayed to God, "O Lord of all, when thou didst appear to me in Gibeon, and didst give me leave to ask a gift of thee, I desired neither silver nor gold, but only wisdom, that I might be able to judge men in justice." God heard his prayer. When the sons of the Canaanite again came before Solomon, he poured hot water on one of the heads of the double-headed monster, whereupon both heads flinched, and both mouths cried out, "We are dying, we are dying, we are but one, not two." Solomon decided that the double-headed son was after all only a single being. 29. On another occasion, Solomon invented a lawsuit in order to elicit the truth in an involved case. 3 men appeared before him, each of whom accused the others of theft. They had been traveling together, and when the Sabbath approached, they halted and prepared to rest and sought a safe hiding place for their money, for it is not allowed to carry money on one's person on the Sabbath. They all 3 together secreted what they had in the same spot, and when the Sabbath was over, they hastened thither only to find that it had been stolen. It was clear one of the three must have been the thief, but which one? Solomon said to them, "I know you to be experienced and thorough businessmen. I should like you to help me decide a suit which the king of Rome has submitted to me. In the Roman kingdom, there lived a maiden and a youth who promised each other under oath never to enter into a marriage without obtaining each other's permission. The parents of the girl betrothed their daughter to a man whom she loved, but she refused to become his wife until the companion of her youth gave his consent. She took much gold and silver and sought him out to bribe him. Setting aside his own love for the girl, he offered her and her lover his congratulations and refused to accept the slightest return for the permission granted. On their homeward way, the happy couple were surprised by an old highwayman who was about to rob the young man of his bride and his money. The girl told the brigand the story of her life, closing with these words, "If a youth controlled his passion for me, how much more shouldst thou, an old man, be filled with fear of God, and let me go my way." Her words took effect. The aged highwayman laid hands neither on the girl nor on the money. Now Solomon continued to the three litigants, "I was asked to decide which of the three persons concerned acted most nobly, the girl, the youth, or the highwayman, and I should like to have your views upon the question." The first of the three said, "My praise is for the girl who kept her oath so faithfully." The second, "I should award the palm to the youth who kept himself in check and did not permit his passion to prevail." The third said, "Commend me to the brigand who kept his hands off the money, more especially as he would have been doing all that could be expected of him if he had surrendered the woman he might have taken the money." The last answer sufficed to put Solomon on the right track. The man who was inspired with admiration of the virtues of the robber probably was himself filled with greed of money. He had him cross-examined and finally extorted a confession. He had committed the theft, and he designated the spot where he had hidden the money. 30. Even animals submitted their controversies to Solomon's wise judgment. A man with a jug of milk came upon a serpent wailing pitifully in a field. To the man's question, the serpent replied that it was tortured with thirst. "And what art thou carrying in the jug?" asked the serpent. When it heard what it was, it begged for the milk and promised to reward the man by showing him a hidden treasure. The man gave the milk to the serpent and was then led to a great rock. "Under this rock," said the serpent, "lies the treasure." The man rolled the rock aside and was about to take the treasure when suddenly the serpent made a lunge at him and coiled itself about his neck. "What meanest thou by such conduct?" exclaimed the man. "I am going to kill thee," replied the serpent, "because thou art robbing me of all my money." The man proposed that they put their case to King Solomon and obtain his decision as to who was in the wrong. So they did. Solomon asked the serpent to state what it demanded of the man. "I want to kill him," answered the serpent, "because the scriptures command it, saying, 'Thou shalt bruise the heel of man.'" Solomon said, "First release thy hold upon the man's neck and descend. In court neither party to a lawsuit may enjoy an advantage over the other." The serpent glided to the floor, and Solomon repeated his question and received the same answer as before from the serpent. Then Solomon turned to the man and said, "To thee God's command was to bruise the head of the serpent, do it." And the man crushed the serpent's head. 31. Sometimes Solomon's assertions and views, though they sprang from profound wisdom, seemed strange to the common run of men. In such cases, the wise king did not disdain to illustrate the correctness of his opinions. For instance, both the learned and the ignorant were stung into opposition by Solomon's saying, "One man among 1,000 have I found, but a virtuous woman among all those have I not found." Solomon unhesitatingly pledged himself to prove that he was right. He had his attendants seek out a married couple enjoying a reputation for uprightness and virtue. The husband was cited before him, and Solomon told him that he had decided to appoint him to an exalted office. The king demanded only, as an earnest of his loyalty, that he murder his wife, so that he might be free to marry the king's daughter, a spouse comporting with the dignity of his new station. With a heavy heart, the man went home. His despair grew at sight of his fair wife and his little children. Though determined to do the king's bidding, he still lacked courage to kill his wife while she was awake. He waited until she was tight asleep, but then the child enfolded in the mother's arms rekindled his parental and conjugal affection, and he replaced his sword in its sheath, saying to himself, and if the king were to offer me his whole realm, I would not murder my wife." Thereupon he went to Solomon and told him his final decision. A month later Solomon sent for the wife and declared his love for her. He told her that their happiness could be consummated if she would but do away with her husband. Then she should be made the first wife in his harem. Solomon gave her a leaden sword, which glittered as though fashioned of steel. The woman returned home, resolved to put the sword to its appointed use. Not a quiver of her eyelids betrayed her sinister purpose. On the contrary, by caresses and tender words, she sought to disarm any suspicion that might attach to her. In the night she arose, drew forth the sword, and proceeded to kill her husband. The leaden instrument naturally did no harm, except to awaken her husband, to whom she had to confess her evil intent. The next day both man and wife were summoned before the king, who thus convinced his counselors of the truth of his conviction that no dependence can be placed on woman. 32. The fame of Solomon's wisdom spread far and wide. Many entered the service of the king in the hope of profiting by his wisdom. 3 brothers had served under him for 13 years, and disappointed at not having learnt anything, they made up their minds to quit his service. Solomon gave them the alternative of receiving 100 coins each or being taught 3 wise saws. They decided to take the money. They had scarcely left the town when the youngest of the 3, regardless of the protests of his 2 brothers, hastened back to Solomon and said to him, "My lord, I did not take service under thee to make money. I wanted to acquire wisdom. Pray, take back thy money and teach me wisdom instead." Solomon thereupon imparted the following 3 rules of conduct to him. "When thou travellest abroad, set out on thy journey with the dawn and turn in for the night before darkness falls. Do not cross a river that is swollen, and never betray a secret to a woman." The man quickly overtook his brothers, but he confided nothing to them of what he had learned from Solomon. They journeyed on together. At the approach of the 9th hour, 3 hours after noon, they reached a suitable spot in which to spend the night. The youngest brother, mindful of Solomon's advice, proposed that they stop there. The others taunted him with his stupidity, which, they said, he had begun to display when he carried his money back to Solomon. The 2 proceeded on their way, but the youngest arranged his quarters for the night. When darkness came on, and with it nipping cold, he was snug and comfortable, while his brothers were surprised by a snowstorm in which they perished. The following day he continued his journey, and on the road he found the dead bodies of his brothers. Having appropriated their money, he buried them and went on. When he reached a river that was very much swollen, he bore Solomon's advice in mind and delayed to cross until the flood subsided. While standing on the bank, he observed how some of the king's servants were attempting to ford the stream with beasts laden with gold, and how they were borne down by the flood. After the waters had abated, he crossed and appropriated the gold strapped to the drowned animals. When he returned home, wealthy and wise, he told nothing of what he had experienced even to his wife, who was very curious to find out where her husband had obtained his wealth. Finally, she plied him so closely with questions that Solomon's advice about confiding a secret to a woman was quite forgotten. Once, when his wife was quarreling with him, she cried out, "Not enough that thou didst murder thy brothers, thou desirest to kill me too." Thereupon he was charged with the murder of their husbands by his 2 sisters-in-law. He was tried, condemned to death, and escaped the hangman only when he told the king the story of his life, and was recognized as his former retainer. It was with reference to this man's adventures that Solomon said, "Acquire wisdom, she is better than gold and much fine gold." 33. Another of his disciples had a similar experience. Annually, a man came from a great distance to pay a visit to the wise king, and when he departed, Solomon was in the habit of bestowing a gift upon him. Once the guest refused the gift and asked the king to teach him the language of the birds and the animals instead. The king was ready to grant his request, but he did not fail to warn him first of the great danger connected with such knowledge. "If thou tellest others a word of what thou hearest from an animal," he said, "thou wilt surely suffer death. Thy destruction is inevitable." Nothing daunted, the visitor persisted in his wish, and the king instructed him in the secret art. Returned home, he overheard a conversation between his ox and his ass. The ass said, "Brother, how farest thou with these people?" The ox, "As thou livest, brother, I pass day and night in hard and painful toil." The ass, I can give thee relief, brother. If thou wilt follow my advice, thou shalt live in comfort, and shalt rid thyself of all hard work. The ox, O brother, may thy heart be inclined toward me, to take pity on me and help me. I promise not to depart from thy advice to the right or the left. The ass, God knows, I am speaking to thee in the uprightness of my heart and the purity of my thoughts. My advice to thee is not to eat either straw or fodder this night. When our master notices it, he will suppose that thou art sick. He will put no burdensome work upon thee, and thou canst take a good rest. That is the way I did today. The ox followed the advice of his companion. He touched none of the food thrown to him. The master, suspecting a ruse on the part of the ass, arose during the night, went to the stable, and watched the ass eat his fill from the manger belonging to the ox. He could not help laughing out loud, which greatly amazed his wife, who, of course, had noticed nothing out of the way. The master evaded her questions. Something ludicrous had just occurred to him, he said by way of explanation. For the sly trick played upon the ox, he determined to punish the ass. He ordered the servant to let the ox rest for the day and make the ass do the work of both animals. At evening the ass trudged into the stable tired and exhausted. The ox greeted him with the words, "Brother, hast thou heard aught of what our heartless masters purpose?" "Yes," replied the ass, "I heard them speak of having thee slaughtered, if thou shouldst refuse to eat this night too. They want to make sure of thy flesh at least." Scarcely had the ox heard the words of the ass when he threw himself upon his food like a ravenous lion upon his prey. Not a speck did he leave behind, and the master was suddenly moved to uproarious laughter. This time his wife insisted upon knowing the cause. In vain she entreated and supplicated. She swore not to live with him any more if he did not tell her why he laughed. The man loved her so devotedly that he was ready to sacrifice his life to satisfy her whim, but before taking leave of this world, he desired to see his friends and relations once more, and he invited them all to his house. Meantime his dog was made aware of the master's approaching end, and such sadness took possession of the faithful beast that he touched neither food nor drink. The cock, on the other hand, gaily appropriated the food intended for the dog, and he and his wives enjoyed a banquet. Outraged by such unfeeling behavior, the dog said to the cock, "How great is thy impudence, and how insignificant thy modesty! Thy master is but a step from the grave, and thou eatest and makest merry." The cock's reply was, "Is it my fault if our master is a fool and an idiot? I have 10 wives, and I rule them as I will. Not one dares oppose me and my commands. Our master has a single wife, and this one he cannot control and manage." "What ought our master to do?" asked the dog. "Let him take a heavy stick and belabor his wife's back thoroughly," advised the cock, "and I warrant thee, she won't plague him any more to reveal his secrets." The husband had overheard this conversation too, and the cock's advice seemed good. He followed it, and death was averted. 34. On many occasions, Solomon brought his acumen and wisdom to bear upon foreign rulers who attempted to concoct mischief against him. Solomon needed help in building the temple, and he wrote to Pharaoh, asking him to send artists to Jerusalem. Pharaoh complied with his request, but not honestly. He had his astrologers determine which of his men were destined to die within the year. These candidates for the grave he passed over to Solomon. The Jewish king was not slow to discover the trick played upon him. He immediately returned the men to Egypt, each provided with his grave clothes, and wrote, "To Pharaoh, I suppose thou hadst no shrouds for these people. Herewith I send thee the men, and what they were in need of." 35. Hiram, king of Tyre, the steadfast friend of the dynasty of David, who had done Solomon such valuable services in connection with the building of the temple, was desirous of testing his wisdom. He was in the habit of sending catch questions and riddles to Solomon with the request that he solve them and help him out of his embarrassment about them. Solomon, of course, succeeded in answering them all. Later on he made an agreement with Hiram that they were to exchange conundrums and riddles, and a money fine was to be exacted from the one of them who failed to find the proper answer to a question propounded by the other. Naturally, it was Hiram who was always the loser. The Tyrians maintain that finally Solomon found more than his match in one of Hiram's subjects, one Abdomen, who put many a riddle to Solomon that baffled his wit. Of Solomon's subtlety in riddle guessing, only a few instances have come down to us, all of them connected with riddles put to him by the Queen of Sheba. 37. The story of this queen, of her relation to Solomon, and what induced her to leave her distant home and journey to the court at Jerusalem forms an interesting chapter in the eventful life of the wise king.